Blood satellite.
We're going to get into a topic that is still continuing on the economics arc that we've been on. But we're getting into an area that you are very, very passionate about. And you kind of let me go on the last one about Princes of the Yen by Richard Werner. But you're a great student on economics, being a retired libertarian.
Fuck you, Judas.
as all the best of us are. And I think this is a book that I found very, very interesting, and I like it, and you don't. And I want to hear both sides of this. So I'm going to describe what it says in the book with the disclaimer that I might lean more towards this sort of thinking, but you're completely against it. And I think it's important to show both sides of this. So, and I think we were talking about before, you got a lot to say. So that's why I'm kind of giving us a bit of a wider berth on this part of it. But
I'm gonna try not to flame it, because the guy Mosler is very well respected. It's not like he's. I personally think his ideas are crackpot ideas, but like from a social standpoint, he's not a crackpot. He's probably historically one of the most well respected living economists, even though he's not actually an economist. But that's how he's treated. So,
all right. So the book is. I actually had two of his books. The one we'll talk about now is The 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds of Economic Policy. And I had another one of his called Soft Money Economics, the second one. And these are very, very short books. And I found that each book was kind of repeating itself. I believe he wrote 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds as kind of a nice way to encapsulate his other books. It's sort of a career retrospective. And it summarizes a lot of his ideas. It's like 100 pages. Anyone could get it, read it in an afternoon if you want to. He's very, very to the point with his ideas, and I believe you read this one.
You know what? I actually haven't read any of his books. What I've done is I've consumed. He runs an institute, like an economics institute, and I've read a lot of his articles. And I've watched like 100 hours of his interviews and debates with other economists.
Okay, no, this is good, because this will just summarize all of this stuff. In fact, you might know very well more about this than I do, which is why I want you. Feel free to jump in, feel free to interrupt, and feel free to go off on as many rants as you want to, because I think it's important, because what we're trying to do, not just promote and investigate other ideas, is to really get to the heart of the matter. And, I've read a lot of other economics books prior to the podcast that we never covered on the podcast. I read Wealth of Nations. I read some Milton Friedman as well. Like the very, very basic boilerplate capitalist stuff. A lot of that stuff they would give to you in economics classes. I read that, so I have that perspective, even though we haven't really given it the spotlight in the show before. Maybe we will at some point, but the arc that we're on right now is a bit more, I would call it spigot friendly. Basically,
I respect that. That's what we do, right? Like, we're going through this right now. This and Princes of the Yen are related. You support it. I don't. We're going to discuss it. But that's the point, is to get the story out there. Like, let's talk about the fucking book. So I'm not going to try to throw him under the bus until the last minute.
Yeah. So, and I'll just go through. It's pretty simple. A lot of it, and even the last fraud, the seventh sin, isn't even really a sin. It's kind of like, because he also uses this book as a launch pad to discuss his run for governor, I believe. Like, I think he released this book because he was seeking a career in politics, and he has a list of his policies at the end of the book that I think are kind of interesting. And that's kind of what we'll end on, his recommendations for how to action his ideas. And I appreciate that. I appreciate someone who's got the theory, but then also has, here's what I would do if I like, this is what we were talking about earlier. If I got everything I wanted, if you gave me power, if I got the capital, here's 5 things I would do to make the country better. I at least appreciate that sort of motivation. Anyway, so I'll start with the first fraud. And these are what he calls frauds. They're innocent frauds. So he believes they're just misconceptions. So he's kind of being fantastical with the language, but he's just like, most of this is ignorance. Most of this is just people think it's one way, but it's actually another, and they don't know any better. And throughout the book, he will cite conversations he's had with various Congress people or senators or other economists, people he's debated. You've seen him in many, many debates before, so this is something that he does. And
so that's I just sorry I don't want to interrupt the whole thing, but it's interesting to me. So you said it's a 100-page book. It's a quick read, but you said a significant amount of it is anecdotal conversations that he's had with people.
He'll mention it. So he like a lot of
no, that's fine, because like there's a lot of economic books out there that are longer, much longer than 100 pages, and don't include that almost at all. And the reason I bring it up is I mentioned this to you before we started the show. This book is used almost like an economic handbook by Ilhan Omar and AOC and a lot of the far, like Bernie Sanders, a lot of the far left Congress people and senators right now are. This is essentially, it's not a textbook, but it's almost like a primer for modern monetary theory, which was more or less originated by Mosler. So.
Yeah, basically a lot of those individuals, and these people are not typically economically minded people, but I see why they would like this, because in short, what he's advocating for is like a lot of what fiscal conservatives would cite as like the deficit is bad. We have a deficit. We should not have a deficit. We shouldn't be in debt. We shouldn't just create money and create credit. We should be more restrained and conservative in our spending. And he's saying the opposite. The large, and we'll get into this in a second, but if I had to give like the brief headline, it's like since, and we'll get into this even further in the next episode when we talk about the role of the central bank, is that since the dollar became decoupled from the gold standard, we have what's called fiat currency. Fiat currency, and a lot of people understand it's like, oh, it's nothing. It's just paper. It's made up.
But we don't have a gold standard now. We effectively liberated ourselves. And that, in theory, gives policymakers a lot more freedom to construct policies which they generate full employment, and yet we don't do those sorts of things.
I like to say it opens up their options.
Yeah.
Far beyond what are the imagined options today in Washington.
And some people will say that to discredit the financial system, and in a way they're right, it is made up. And he's saying like that can be used to our benefit, because what he's saying, since it became decoupled from any sort of anchor, any sort of hard commodity, it's like really it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. And he said with the right application, you can essentially create infinite credit, and as long as it's applied in the right areas, in the right productive forces, that there's almost no downside. You can have growth indefinitely. What he would also say is that if you misallocate the money, that's where you get inflation. That's where you get all the bad stuff you talked about.
The core of MMT, and for the elevator speech, if you understand this, you've got a big head start into the big change that MMT has made to policy, and that is sequence. Up until that time, all thinking, all mainstream models, all discussion implied or understood that the government had to get money first through taxes, presumably, before it could spend. And every congressman, every member of parliament, they understood they had to somehow get money in before they could spend it. And what they couldn't get in taxes, they would have to go out and borrow. And in the US, the metaphor is you borrow from China and leave the debt to our children. And that sequence is pervasive. There was no one questioned that sequence. All the mainstream models that had G minus T equals this and that, the presumption was that the government would take in through taxing or borrowing, the funds that it was going to spend. Okay, now modern monetary theory turns all that around with the understanding that that's entirely backwards, that the government through its agents, the Federal Reserve, one way or another, is the source of the dollars that are used to pay taxes. They don't come from the private sector. They come from the government.
He's basically saying a lot of the constraints that people typically think exist don't really matter. That's the big headline of the book, as far as I'm concerned. And we'll get into the actual things. And so that's the first deadly innocent fraud. Fraud 1, it said the federal government must raise funds through taxation or borrowing in order to spend. That's the innocent fraud. In reality, the federal government can always make any and all of its payments on its own currency, no matter how large the deficit is or how few taxes it collects. So that's I think that's he leads
He's
the
right.
book with the most
That's
important
just a fact.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just a fact. But this is a sorry. I won't.
No.
dwell long on
I
this.
would like you to jump in as much as you
So
want.
I'm going to just paraphrase it back to make sure, just so that you can catch me if I'm not saying the same thing. But people in Congress and people in the government seem to think that they can only spend money that they take from the population through taxes. But the truth is, because they control the printing press, they can actually print as much money as they want. And that is factually true. It's factually true in the sense that we no longer have a gold standard, and they have itchy trigger fingers and a printing press. They have the physical ability to print as much as they want. That's what he's saying. You will notice that in that statement, there is no value judgment. We're not talking about consequences. We're not, I know he's going to talk about them in the other 6, but at this point, he's laying the foundation rhetorically by saying we can literally do whatever we want. Saying I can do whatever I want is kind of like saying I can step on the train tracks. I can. Yes, you can. Go ahead and do it and see what happens. That's where I'll leave
He's
it.
got a line here that says the government itself neither has nor doesn't have any dollars, any more than a bowling alley ever has a box of points. He says when it comes to the dollar, the federal government is the scorekeeper.
That's excellent. You know what? I think bowling alleys should implement that. They should give free points to anybody who wants them at the bowling alley. Let's do that and see how long bowling alleys last.
No. Let's keep in this. I think they should give me all the points because there are certain people during certain games that should bowl a 700 game.
I know you're being funny, but the great thing about it is you've identified the role of modern monetary theory in our economy, in our society right now. It is the economic theory that supports tyrants. It is actually designed, it's purpose-built and funded by tyrants so that they can take your money, justify it economically, and do whatever the fuck they want with it. I played my hand, but that's what MMT is. Dimes goes to the bowling alley and he thinks he should bowl 700. They give him all the points, and at gunpoint he tells everybody else there's none left.
Yeah, I'm gonna again spoil my own argument here because I was gonna make this at the end. What people don't usually like about there's this idea of like spigots. Spigots are like you turn it and the water comes out. In this case, the free money or the credit.
I'm a big spigot guy.
Yeah. So the reason a lot of people say most people don't like spigots is because they're just turned on over, frankly, useless minorities. That's what they'll say. Like it's cranked open over the Black community or the Aboriginal community, and there's no spigot turned on over the cool schizo white guys. And all I'm saying is like crank open the spigot over the cool white sociopaths like myself, and then watch everything get better.
I like that twist. The only framing that I would change there, I agree with like functionally what you're saying. We should do that exact thing, but you need to just understand the damage, the economic and social damage that this theory in practice causes essentially amounts to war. And what you're saying is this is a theory which we can use as a weapon in an ethnic sectarian civil war to starve and rape our opponents. Yes, do it. Let's do it. MMT, Aryan MMT all the way.
Yes.
Let's go.
Yeah, I've already won.
We're already won.
Okay.
But as a peacetime economic theory in a high trust society, the people that support this, who are all Jews, need to be hung. So
yeah, here's the next part I want to get to. I want to get to this now. Because it kind of ties into, he front loads the book. I think the most important stuff is at the beginning of the book. It gets kind of repetitive near the end and a bit more anecdotal, but the real crux of his argument's at the front end of the book. He says, this does not mean that the government can spend all it wants without consequence. Overspending can drive up prices and fuel inflation, but never insolvency or bounced pension checks. And this is something I wanted to talk about. And this is a big topic, and maybe I shot myself in the foot by getting into it now, but what we talk about, especially as like millennials and Zoomers and this generation, it's like, oh my God, eventually the pension's going to run out. Eventually, like, there's going to be not enough money there to pay all these retirement funds. And he's basically saying that there's probably never going to be a future where the pensions alone are going to run out. They'll let a lot of stuff collapse, but they have the power to make sure the pension checks, the retirement checks always arrive. Now, it might be the case that we're just not afforded that as young people, but as long as, there's never going to be a situation where like old people and seniors and boomers stop getting their retirement payments. So I think that's the claim he's making. That's never going to happen, and they'd have the power to just do that forever, or until they all die.
But there is a casual omission of the cost of that. Like, you can't. Again, I'm not disagreeing that you can do that. The government could do that today. He's advocating that the government should do that today, but he's not talking, unless he is later. But he's not talking about what that would cost.
And let me return to. I wanted to say that, and I wanted to return to what we were just talking about, because I think it's interesting. Now, before the episode, you had made a good point, and we were talking about kind of the allocation of capital and whatnot. Now, I've got a hypothetical for you, kind of based on what we were just talking about. What if, because your point was that any centralized planning that tries to replace market forces will end up with a misallocation of the capital, and just centralized planning doesn't work very well. Now, what if there's a hybrid model where you have the free marketplace, kind of quote unquote free-ish, kind of like we have now, and that the central planners kind of identify what productive forces emerge and choose just to bet on that. For example, what if the central bank decided to free up a lot of credit, essentially turn the spigot off of black people and crank open the spigot over SpaceX and Elon Musk's companies? What if we reallocated all the free welfare shit and put it in this one company that emerged organically, emerged from the market? In a way, it didn't really, because SpaceX and Musk have been taking government subsidies this whole time, which might be evidence that it worked. But I'm like, would that be offensive to you if there was like boundless free credit, but it was all pointed in the direction of colonizing Mars?
You're talking about two different things, and this is again one of the rhetorical traps that the way that Mosler, as a sneaky Jew, writes. And a lot of to be fair, a lot of economists write this way because they know people don't grasp the theory. But you can talk about, I'm going to write, my theory supports the thing you want, right? And then the other part of it is my theory in principle supports your culture and your morality. So, which is to say, you might not get the thing you want, but it creates a world you want to live in. So, if the government, through this central planning, decided to fund Musk to colonize Mars, yes, I want that. You're giving me what I want. But I'm also, my IQ is above 90. So I'm saying, regardless, you are still doing that through a system of tyranny, which does not agree with my moral principles. And functionally, I know that the fact that you gave it to him means that when the Democrats are voted in 4 years, they can just as easily take it away and give it to the niggers. And I would rather that power not exist. That's a political argument. There's also an economic argument against it, but that's the political argument against it.
Now, I'm for taking all the money from blacks and aboriginals and giving it to Elon Musk. Now, call me crazy.
I love that. But again, you have to be able to separate it morally and say what you're doing is tyranny. Now, it might be, righteous tyranny against your enemies. I'm fine with righteous tyranny against my enemies, but don't ever call it good economics. It's not. It's war. You're raping the enemy. That's what you're doing.
Yes. And that is
but it's,
good.
It's not
cool.
Economics, though. It's not economics, though, because you can't take. The reason I say it's important is because if you want to take that system when the war ends and you've killed them all and the whole population is white and they're friendly, you're going to apply that system to your own people. Now you're raping your own people for economics. So that's the reason that we have to make the distinction. This is a great theory for wiping out our enemies. It is not a great theory for building a growing, healthy economy with lots of employment.
All I want from you, from this episode, is you to sit back and let yourself become a tyrant. Just let it happen. Just let it happen.
But look, I'm a selective tyrant. I don't want to tyrannize my own people. I'm not just a tyrant only.
Now, here we go with tyrannize. What is it? What do you say before? Not Longinus? Longinus?
Longinus. I did look it up, by the way. It's not Longinus, it's Longinus. Like J like jam, I like tide. That's the pronunciation. Longinus.
When you say you looked it up, where did you look this? How did you look this up? When did you look this up?
When you go to Wikipedia,
yeah,
they have the English pronunciation on the top page. You can click on it and they'll show you.
Yeah, but that's all written by Swedes and such.
Well, you know what it is? There's Longines, which is the watch brand, which I got wrong. But I was talking about the spear of Longinus, which Longinus was the Roman guard that threw a spear at Christ's torso.
Because really, why would they name a watch after that?
Well, they did. It is the same word, but the watch is a Swiss brand, so it's a French word. I don't know. It's a fucking huge thing.
This is an odd ass company. All right. So also before we continue, I used Elon Musk just as an example. I don't want people to get the idea that I'm a huge Elon Musk fan. I'm neither hot nor cold on Elon Musk.
We're tiny Elon Musk fans.
What he represents is just an imperfect, insanely ambitious, irregular type of guy. I'd like more of him. I'd like it if the spotlight wasn't on him as like the only guy who seems to be taking moonshots like this. Like, you know, I didn't love Steve Jobs. I like the role that Steve Jobs fulfilled as an innovator, as just a type of mind, and I would like to maximize those types of minds. I'm just reaching in a bag. I'm coming up with Elon Musk. There's probably some others right now, but yeah. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off there.
Robert Bigelow, interesting. I know you didn't make that connection. Did you know Robert Bigelow is the other competitor for all of the space contracts? The Skinwalker Ranch guy.
Are you joking, or is that true?
I'm not fucking around. I've been following him since I was a teenager. Robert Bigelow is actually one of my heroes, which is why the Skinwalker Ranch thing was so weird. He created, and this is a real thing that's been tested now in a few cases, he created an inflatable space hab. So you can have, like, the size of a house, like, 200 cubic meters of air in, like, a Mylar inflatable bubble in space, and they have one up there. They tested it, and they're working on a project now in the next 10 years to build a ring of these bubbles that you can go up in a shuttle and like work on massive labs. You're talking about like 100 times of the internal area of the ISS. So
holy shit.
Yeah.
Fuck it. Okay, better than Musk. Give all the credit. Turn on the credit spigot over Robert Bigelow.
Robert Bigelow, yeah.
Let's get to space and let's figure out what the fuck's going on at Skinwalker Ranch. Let's buy this guy some cameras or something.
You can at least get him a fucking camera for the cabin.
Give this guy an iPhone. I don't know. Like
$1 trillion federal program to find skinwalkers. Yes.
A couple of fucking pea brains did it in Paranormal Activity. I think Robert Bigelow can figure a couple of things out. The thing I wanted to get to was taxes, and he explained taxes here in a way that might seem obvious to a lot of people, but I thought this would appeal to you uniquely because, like, we agree that the government doesn't raise money with taxes. It's like, to do something, we have to take taxes from the people. It doesn't necessarily need to do that, which begs the question, why taxes? Why do taxes exist at all? And he explained it in a way that taxes are just a way to control people. It's a way to control spending. And it's a way to kind of make it so people don't actually drive up the price of things.
What we've recognized is that the currency itself is a simple public monopoly.
Okay. So only the government issues it.
Yeah, the government is the single supplier of the thing that it demands for payment of taxes. It's a monopoly. And it's a coercive monopoly. If you don't pay your taxes, you go to jail or lose your house or lose your car. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And there aren't any other schools of thought that start with that, right, with that money story. And everything we do begins with that money story. That's our understanding. That's where you start your understanding of anything financial. Without that, you're not starting at the beginning, as I spoke to you before the show. So that's the beginning. So the beginning is a government that we'll presume wants to provision itself, which means it wants soldiers for the army, it wants judges and lawyers in the legal system, it wants public health workers, it wants
It wants to get stuff done.
Yeah, and it wants to transfer real goods and services from private to public domains. And so it needs labor, it needs food for the cafeteria, it needs fuel for the army, it needs all these things.
So why does the federal government tax us, he says, if it doesn't actually get anything to spend and doesn't need anything from us? He said, he gives an example of parents with a few kids, and you distribute coupons for them. Like, the parents demand 10 coupons a week from their children for chores. And when the parents don't actually need the coupons, basically money and taxes are a way to drive production. It's to get people to do something that you want, which makes sense to me, because that's all money is. Money, it doesn't exist, but what money drives people to do is to be productive. And he actually gave an example of, this is actually what they did in Africa in the 1800s. He said when the British established colonies in Africa to grow crops, the British offered jobs to the local population, but none of them were interested in earning British coins. So what they said was they placed a hut tax. Everyone has to pay a hut tax. So all of your dwellings, we're the government, you got to pay us. And that's only payable in British coins. So suddenly the area was monetized and everyone needed coins. They started like trading with each other, doing things to get coins. Like they just made
I'm gonna stop you right there, because this was just so obvious. So look, I don't like Africans any more than anybody else does, but we're talking about this as a model for an economic system. So you're saying you have a project and there's people who you need them. They don't need you, right? You've asked them to participate and they said, no, I'm not interested. You don't have anything I want. I'm busy. Fuck off. And you said, no, I need you. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to point a gun at you. I'm pointing a gun at your fucking, your child's head. You're going to give me the dollars that you don't have, or I'm going to kill your fucking daughter. And the nigger says, well, shit, where do I get the money? And he says, you work for me. Now you have the money. Now you can pay me. You never had the money. Now you have it, but it's gone because you paid me back. The net interaction here is I get all of your labor for free, and you get fucking nothing. What you do get is all the work you were doing in your community, the farming and the church building. That doesn't happen now because you're a slave to me. So yeah, this is a great system for enslaving someone. You're essentially just defined slavery, but it's a special type of slavery which is administered in such a way that the person of below average intelligence thinks it's economics, but it's fucking straight up slavery.
But that is our system. It's literally how they made money in the United States of America.
And that was my other point, is that he said in the first sin, right? He said in the first sin that, congressmen and senators and all these people who have been administering this country for 250 years, but apparently no less than him, all of these people believe that we need to tax in order to pay for services, but that's not true. He's established that now, and now he can go and tell you what it's actually for. But the thing is, the first one, as I said earlier, isn't fucking true. You actually do need price discovery, which means you need to tax the people based on their income, based on the number of people you have, and use those dollars, and those dollars are used to pay for the services. We have a government worker friend, who believes that the private industry creates nothing, that it exists at the behest of the government, and the government creates everything. But the reality is, no government worker has ever put a nail into a building, has ever, framed a house, or ever shingled a house, or has ever farmed a fucking plot of corn. All productivity is the private sector. Everything that you eat and you live in comes from the private sector, and private sector people need dollars to pay for food for their fucking families. So yes, actually, you do need money to pay for those things. So the reason that, again, he's got you, the listener, or you, the reader, into this loop thinking, well, the money doesn't matter. What is the money actually for? Oh, the money is a tool of our own enslavement. We should get rid of it. No, the money isn't a tool of your enslavement. The money was created as a system, as a token or a marker, as equity to represent the labor that you've done, which we as a community value, right? Now you can use it to go and trade for something else. That's what money's always been. And every other economist, except people who are bought into MMT, understand this basic truth. Even the fucking Keynesians understand this. Sorry.
I mean, I guess I disagree, because we've discussed how money was created. It was literally like it was created by governments. Like before governments, there was no money. Like you had labor and stuff, but it was just to extort. It was to control.
Right, but
production.
that isn't true though. We had a gold standard prior to 1970.
But why do people care about gold? Like there was a gold, like people weren't just trading chunks of gold.
Right. So this is just money, just basic money theory. When you labor, right, you can labor for yourself, but you would never do surplus labor unless you thought you could exchange that labor for some kind of equity that was tradable and fungible that was worth the labor. So if you have a community where there's a system, we'll call that system money, but it's a system whereby you can do surplus labor and other people, even though you didn't labor for them and there might be a time gap between you and them, you can actually take that labor, refine it into something like a gold coin, give it to them, and they actually value it enough that they will give you something that you want later on in the day that's totally unrelated. Like you can build a house and they'll give you a chicken. That's where money comes from. It was not created by government. Like all things, money is just a resource. Money is more similar to churches or to corn than it is to a government institution. Thinking of money as a creation or institution of government is like thinking of education and healthcare as an institution of government. It's something that they realized was profitable and important for controlling society, and so they have captured it. But money is not a creation.
But that's the thing, like money is the representation of the capture of all that. Like all that stuff predates money. Money was a way for the state to quantify it. And
no, I'm saying the money is gold. Like historically, this is not arguable. Prior to organized governments, every society, even like pre-written societies, all had forms of money. Money is just a thing that humans have always done for 15,000 years.
But it was minted by the governments of those. Like, there's no way around this. No one made coins. No individuals made coins, Judas. Like, it was made by a central thing.
Okay, for example, there's two examples here. So first of all, ancient governments didn't. First of all, they did collect money, but they didn't have money. They used grain. So like the Babylonians and whoever, they would literally use grain for payment. So they're using grain as a medium of exchange. It's bad money, but money doesn't mean currency. I think you're talking about currency, like coins and dollars and things like that. Currency is a type of money, but money is just a medium of exchange. Money is anything that people trade because the work that they did needs to be represented in order to get value from someone else. So like literally a bushel of corn could be money if you're going to trade that for someone else. That's money. Like if I give you my shoe and you scratch my back, the shoe is money. That's what money means. Currency is not the shoe. Currency would be a $5 bill. Right. So
okay, guys, let's just say we're talking about currency. We're not talking about this abstract thing.
You're right.
Where it's also corn and stuff.
Currency is always created by money. Is always created by government and is always controlled by government. That's what currency is. I agree with you there. But then this is the rhetorical problem with Mosler and the MMT guys, is they're not talking about money. They're talking about currency. But all of these economic arguments prior to MMT were in the context of money, not currency. They've written out, and I said this at the beginning, they've written out a whole sector of the world of consequences that they can just ignore. Because all that matters is what the government does. It doesn't matter what people want to do with each other. It doesn't matter about the society and history. None of that matters, you know?
Well, that's kind of what he's saying. He's saying, like, the productive forces and everything are still there, and that the currency is just a way to control that. That's basically what he's saying. Because what this means is that all taxation is just theft. Because, you know, we're circling back to a lot of the libertarian stuff. When they would say taxation is theft, people think that's a silly thing to say, but it kind of is if they don't need it to fund their own stuff. And it's only that means that taxes, in this sense, are only a form of control then.
Yeah, the model I like to use so people can understand the pricing and how it works is, you know, my wife and I were in Pompeii a few years ago, and the guide showed us the coins that they used. And he said what happened in Pompeii was a nice place to live because they would collect these coins for tax, and then they would pay people to do public service, police and public safety and the aqueducts and all this sanitation. And I said, well, you know, what actually happened was you pay the people first and then you collect the coins. He goes, no, you collect tax and then you pay the people. I said, well, where'd the coins come from? He says, well, the government made them. I said, well, how did anybody get the coins to pay the tax? And he goes, so they spent them first and then collected them? I said, well, how else can it work? And he grabs his head and he goes, no. And he walked away. He wouldn't talk to me anymore. Okay, so, but everybody in Pompeii knew how it worked. They put a tax on everybody's house. People would show up for work. They'd pay them these coins out of the coin bar. They weren't valuable coins. And they'd get things done. Well, they found like 20,000 coins in the street. All right, well, how'd they get there? Okay, so the government must have spent more than it collected. Okay, that's what we call deficit spending. And because people were coming to earn the coins for two reasons. Number one, to pay the tax. And number two, they needed some to be out in the street. That's the net money supply in the economy. Okay, the coins in the street are the public debt, they're the net money supply in the economy. They're the equity that supports the entire credit structure.
This is my personal belief, although I haven't heard too many people talk about this. My personal belief is the inclusion of this in MMT is a way to capture low IQ right-wingers into their sphere. And the reason is people that have studied right-wing economics, Friedman, for example, if you've looked at Friedman, who's pretty basic, you would know that, yes, taxation is essentially theft, but the biggest tax, especially lately, the government levels against us, is inflation, which is to say you hold on to money expecting the price of a good to be a certain price later on. And when you go to buy that good, it turns out that it's not $5 anymore, it's $12, right? That's the biggest tax that we deal with. Like if your income is $100,000 and the government has 10% inflation, you've lost 10% of your income, which is, imagine if the government put a 10% tax on you, there would be a revolt. And so the whole problem with him saying, oh, don't worry about taxes. We don't even need to tax. We're just going to spend. We're just going to print and spend. And then he's lying to you when he says there won't be inflation. He has no proof of that. There will be. And then the problem with inflation is it's a tax for which there is no congressional hearing or bill passed. There's no way for the public to pass judgment on it. And to the majority of the public, they don't view inflation as a tax. They don't even understand they're being taxed. To them, it's an act of God, which is, again, why this is so tempting to tyrants.
Well, this is why I think it gets perverted by the AOCs of the world, because when I hear guys like him, and I haven't listened to as many debates or anything as you have, so I might be way off on this, but he's not even saying, at least from my perspective, that means that we should get rid of taxes. He's saying, but this is the function of taxes as a way to both inflate and deflate as we need it, because you need to inflate and deflate the economy at various times to just to control it. That's what the central bank does. It inflates and deflates. But then I just want to point out, just for reference, and somebody can ping me on this if I'm incorrect, but the whole idea of inflating and deflating the economy through the business cycle, using tax money to do that, like either holding it or releasing it or printing more or printing less, that's business cycle theory that's only been around for less than 100 years. And it is very, very modern. And the concept of taxation to pay for public services, we just talked about, has existed for 5,000 years. So for him to say the whole point to taxes is just slavery and to juice the business cycle is ridiculous, because we've only known about the business cycle since the First World War. So could we make the argument that we're in unprecedented times, though, because money is decoupled from any sort of commodity?
He's right. No, but he doesn't say that. He wants it to be even more decoupled. Previously, the money was coupled to a hard commodity which cannot be increased in volume, which is gold, right? I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying it was better than fucking nothing. We decoupled, and then it's essentially coupled to the trust in the government. That's all it's been coupled to since the mid-70s, is our faith that the government won't rape us. And now he's saying, essentially, we don't even need that. We don't even need the taxation, which is, and by taxation, I mean, the government used to not be able to collect, say, 50% taxes, because if they did, we'd murder them, right? So there was a limited amount of tax funds. Now he's saying, don't worry about taxing, you can have infinite money. But that will still come to us through inflation. So yeah, it's not, he's not going back to the gold standard. He's going the opposite direction, at accelerating in the opposite direction.
Well, I guess the argument against that would just be that there's no conceivable future where we recouple with the gold standard.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the conceivable future where we recouple with the gold standard is death of 150 million people. But it's, yeah, you're right. Aside from that, no, there's no way. Because the entire system, corporations, governments, organizations all rely on constant growth through money printing and fiat inflation. So yeah, no, you're right that the only world where we couple back up with real goods is a lot of blood.
Yeah, basically, even in the next book we talk about, called The Money Revolution, it really comes back to Nixon in the 70s. Once the dollar became decoupled from the gold standard, it basically said all bets are off. Everything is, and if you look at the way the deficit is, if you look at the amount of government debts in the trillions, I think the way at least the way I see these guys looking at it, which is like, there's no way back. The only way out is through. The only way out is like post-COVID, I think American like debt, in terms of credit, is like $3 trillion. It's something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the only way that makes sense.
Asymptotic. Yeah.
Yeah. And the only way it makes sense is, and he kind of gets into this in the book, which is like, this is never getting paid down, because it doesn't even make sense to pay down, because it's like, it's made up. So
it's funny that his solution to never paying it's never getting paid down. He's looking at that and saying, rather than saying this is a disaster, we need to resolve it, he's saying, hey, look, free money. Well, it just keeps increasing and we don't have to pay it down. Let's take more.
Well, what he says is it's not so much the money, it's what the money causes to happen. Like releasing or taking money out of the system controls people's consumer spending. And that's something you want to control. Just like money, like in the Africa example, money doesn't matter. It's you're controlling the productive forces. You're getting people to work. You're creating that demand. So what the government actually cares about...
slaves, though. I just want to bring up again that that example, though, is not the same as us, because they are literal slaves at the point of a gun. Unless, and if you want to use the example, it's fine, but then we're just saying, we're not talking about economics. We're talking about we're slaves at the point of a gun. At the end of this podcast, you should pick up a gun and shoot your local congressman.
Yeah, but that's
so
also, that is what you
frame.
advocate for, because you know it's true.
I know it's true, so I am... Well, I can't say that, but
no, but like
I know
that's
it's
what,
true.
you can't say it's not true though. It's not wrong.
No,
like, it's
again,
true.
like I said at the beginning, most of the stuff he's saying, right? Most of the stuff he's saying is true, but the conclusion that he's drawing is exactly what you'd think a 60-year-old hedge fund Jew would draw, which is this is an excellent opportunity for tyranny and rape. And my conclusion is it's an excellent opportunity to gather a militia to murder tyrannical rapists. So
I want to do some raping.
We're both agreeing that it's true. And I'm saying this is like the dividing line that separates us from them in the coming sectarian war.
Yeah. And really, like, we're still at the first deadly innocent fraud.
No, we made it to 3 at least, didn't we?
In the process of discussing it, we actually touched on all the other ones. Like the second one
is all related. It's not a complicated theory.
The second fraud is with government deficits, we're leaving our debt burden to our children. He says, in reality, what they say is higher deficits today mean higher taxes tomorrow. He says, there's really no realistic way for children to even pay back what he's saying. And this is something I actually agree with. He says, we're in a situation right now where we're trying to limit investment we're limiting spending right now that would be spending that's invested in the youth, because we're trying to save the youth from debt. But he says that all that matters really is that young people are able to keep producing. So it's like what we should be doing is spending on education, invest in jobs programs, like making sure that the next generation...
Did he actually say education? We need to spend on education? When we have exponentially higher education spending, we have education spending that would make the eyes bleed on any of our ancestors.
But he's saying,
and
like,
it results in worse...
All he's saying is like the government needs to treat the younger generation as production for, like, that's kind of what they're saying. Like, they're not going to be able to pay us to retire. It's like, no one's paying anyone really. It's just that the government keeps going, and you need people to keep the government going.
He's essentially saying we need to come to terms with the fact that we're all just slaves and the money doesn't exist. All that exists is bullets.
Well, basically all he said is like, this is what we did in the 60s. And he said, we did it in the 60s and it led to all this like free shit. And then we stopped. And he's like, well, you're in a position where you're kind of fucking over the young people right now. No one's getting anything out of anything. So you might as well like make it so young people can get more education and get more trained and more advanced skills or whatever.
Right.
Just keep going on that track.
So wipe out the debt and hand them a bunch of free goods that's essentially printed.
Not even free goods, just like free like training for university.
But it's also, I mean, because money is a store of value, right? Or currency, whatever you want to say. But like the point is if you have debt and then you no longer have debt, it's the equivalent of if you had no debt and you were handed $30,000. From an economic standpoint, it's identical. There's no difference. And the same thing, like, well, I'm not going to give you a car, or I'm not going to give you 30 grand, but I'm going to give you a car. Now you have a car. Well, the equivalent would be somebody who The point is, it's the same fucking thing. You've still inflated it because that car has value. The people that made the car have to be paid, which means somebody had to pay them. You had to pay $30,000 for the car. The people that you paid, you didn't give the $30,000 to the kid. You gave him the car, but the auto worker got $30,000, and he's going to go back into the economy, and he's going to drive up the cost of cheese by 20%. And the big thing about this is they always hand wave inflation. So I think the big thing, if people are listening to this, is to hear Mosler's primary argument for why this will not affect inflation. The massive increase in the T1 money supply is not going to affect inflation.
What's the T1 money supply for the folks at home?
It's just I might have said that wrong, but it's essentially the number of dollars floating in the private sphere. So mom and pop have a checking account, those dollars, and then the bank has cash in the till, and the company that they work for has a safe. The real money, not the money on paper, but the actual money that's accountable. When you talk about GDP, the money that's moving around and is real, that's the money supply. So if you're increasing that supply, right? You know that if you are printing money, that money that wasn't there before, you're not destroying any of it. You're giving money to people that didn't work for that money. They might be in a bad spot. You might think they morally deserve it, but they didn't have the money. Now you're giving it to them. What are they going to do with it? They're going to spend it. And spending is competition, which causes prices to rise. That's just basic economics, but they always say that it's not real.
So let's say we're in a situation right now where there's record lows of specifically young white men, but also young men generally, not going to school, priced out of it, whatever it is. Let's say they did go to school, racked up all kinds of debt, went to fucking Harvard or whatever, got that debt canceled so that they've got an education now. Does that still cause inflation?
Yeah, of course.
How does that drive up the price of cheese, though?
Because they buy more cheese. Do you think a guy who has $50,000 or $100,000 in student debt versus a guy who has zero debt and is keeping every paycheck, which guy do you think buys more cheese?
Well, then it just sounds like we have an investment in keeping people poor and sad.
We do. That's how it currently works.
Yeah, but that's bad. That's bad.
I agree
this is a solution to that, though.
No, it's not a solution because the price of cheese goes up and it cancels it all fucking out. Because it's now you have money in the bank, but everything costs 5 times as much, so you can't afford it anyways. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. And in the process, the guys that wrote this system, they're taking a cut. Every time one of these transactions happens, it doesn't go directly to you. It goes through them, and they take a cut. That's why they're advocating for it. Again, it's a weapon of tyranny. If you're the tyrant, this is the best possible system. If you're at the top of this and you're the one doing it, you can become literally you become Xerxes. But I mean, for a normal person, you don't want to be a citizen in a country where this is implemented.
And pretty much I think we did cover all of the frauds essentially. Basically, it's saying what it's saying is, in short, everything you know about the monetary system, it's actually the opposite. That we need savings to provide the funds for investment. In fact, investment causes. He's kind of reversing the correlation between investment and savings, saying that essentially, like we already covered, everything's kind of made up. Nothing really matters. So I think if we keep going through, it's kind of going to be the same thing. Deadly innocent fraud 5. The trade deficit is an unsustainable imbalance that takes away jobs and output. In reality, what drives down unemployment is high taxes versus economic spending. I think we kind of covered that anyway in the other things. Let me just get into quickly his policy suggestions. I want to be fair on that front. His policy suggestions near the back of the book, pretty brief. He advocates for a tax holiday, basically a month where no one needs to pay any taxes. National service jobs. He also advocates for universal health care. That should not be surprising. He says, we currently have a strategic oil reserve. This should be extended to stores of other necessities for the purposes of emergency consumption, which you don't really have much right now. The purpose should not be to support special interest groups, but to provide the consumer with real supplies of actual consumables during rainy days, during crises, during COVID, whatever it might be. He also had a plan in place, which I'm interested to see where people. Let me hear you about this. Okay, I think I know what you're going to say to this, but his plan is that A plan where someone, if they default on their mortgage, the government buys it from them and rents it back to them at an affordable rate until they can, over time, buy it back. So it would prioritize homeowners, even those who couldn't pay for the houses. I think I know what you're going to say, but what do you think about that?
I don't want to have a 20-minute conversation about it, but every single leg of that process is the ripest possible thing for fraud. So both fraud from the government to juice house prices so that they can buy them all up and rent them back out like BlackRock. Fraud for the homeowner to get into a house that they can't afford, knowing full well that they'll be able to rent it. Meanwhile, a private landlord would never give them that deal, but the government will, which will destroy. I mean, I thought we're a pro landlord podcast.
We stand landlords here.
You know what it is? That's a great way to speed run government owning all private housing, or they're no longer being private housing. That's what would happen.
That is eventually. Yeah, let me just say this. So before the show, you think that Warren Mosler, as someone who's consumed so much of his content, do you think he has any sort of agenda that he's not being clear about? Or you talked about how a lot of the Democrats like him. Do you think they like him for the wrong reasons, the right reasons, or you think he's...
I think the first thing for our guys to do is look up a photo of Warren Mosler, actually. His physiognomy is that of a rat Jew. And he was a nobody hedge fund manager. Like, he made a lot of money. He probably made $50, $100 million. But for a hedge fund manager, he was not that successful. He's not that bright. And the next thing I would say is go look at his interviews, because he's not that well spoken. He stutters over himself. He's a little bit confused, and he contradicts himself a lot. And it's interesting that these books only came out in the last 20-ish years, and they only came out as he started to make friends in Congress and in the Senate. And this is, to me, it's not like it's a new story. It's just classic. He was a weak loser and a Jew who was looking for a way to juice the system. He made friends with some unscrupulous and fraudulent people in politics.
Let me just say, he also lives in the Virgin Islands. I don't know if
there you go. He doesn't even live in the U.S. anymore. And then he wrote a series of books espousing a monetary theory which was almost purpose-built for the rape of North America. It was purpose-built for the destruction of the market economy, which I find is a dirty word, whatever. It's purpose-built for the destruction of the economy that we currently have. It's purpose-built for the tyrant and for the rapist. Everything about this is just, the rules don't matter. I take what I want. You're too stupid to understand. Don't argue with me. That's MMT in a nutshell. And if you don't believe me, go look at the names and faces of people that are espousing this in Congress.
Holy shit, he's 73. He does not look 73.
Yeah, he's probably drinking adrenochrome.
Well, I mean, you know,
he's one of the worst. This guy, like, as a person, he's one of the worst. Yeah, he has done, like, from a philanthropic standpoint, he talks, and I've listened to many of his interviews. He talks at length about the millions of dollars that he spent, like, having custom cars built with, like, designs that he did. Even Bill Gates puts on a patina of, like, I help people in Africa. This guy is just pure vanity and materialism. He's the Yuval Noah Harari of economics.
It's funny that a guy in his 70s is getting cars made based on his shitty drawings.
Yeah,
that's something a kid
That's
would
him.
Do.
That's this fucking guy. Money doesn't matter.
Dude, what are the odds that you've designed the coolest car?
Yeah.
Very low. like imagine us just, like, me drawing a house. It's going to look like a 7-year-old drew a castle. And guess what? There's still fucking velociraptors in the moat.
I think we should tie him to a front of, like, a transcontinental freight train and let him sit there for, like, 3 weeks as it delivers corn.
So not kill him, just take him, like, be
well,
on
I mean,
the
he'll probably die, but it would be a good experience for him.
I mean, that, as you know, there's a lot of train guys listen to the show too. I mean, that sounds like a great year.
Yeah, if you're in a luxury viewing car, yeah.
No, tied to the front and getting a front row seat.
Oh, okay. No, that's true. Fair enough. Put him on the cow catcher.
How can you be certain that the train really runs on time unless you're at the very front?
Yep, that's true.
All right, this is actually what I was hoping for from this, because I didn't want to just belch out all this stuff, because you've looked more into this. Like, you've been following this for years and years and years. And I've heard him on a couple of podcasts, not as much as you. And there's certain things that he had said that I like, but I I think you're really gonna not like the next episode because we get really deep into infinite credit. But I still maintain, like, me as a landlord appreciator, as a tyranny guy, one of these tyranny guys you hear about, right? And someone who just, I want all of my sad white sociopath fellas to get infinite credit. And if that makes me pea-brained, if that makes me big-dicked, if that makes me...
Man. Not at all. That's all I kind of want to get as a response from people, because I think there's a lot of people that are in that same boat. And it's like, hold on, this sounds like the invention of the atom bomb. You know, it's an economic atom bomb. Like, on the one hand, it causes great tragedy, but on the other hand, we win the war. So, like, look, I just want to be honest about what it is. It is a destructive weapon. It is. I don't want people to, like, you wouldn't describe the atom bomb as increasing productivity. You would describe it as a rice cooker, right? It cooks rice. So if you want to describe this, as like the burger burner, then yeah, it's the burger burner. If that's your goal, this is the best thing.
Yeah,
seriously.
What I get when I read these books, it's kind of electrifying in the sense that, like, it acknowledges that things are insane. It acknowledges that everything's made up. Something happened in the 70s. You don't need to blame Nixon, but Nixon was president during the time. Decoupled from the gold standard. So all bets are off. The national debt makes no sense. Yeah. Nothing makes any sense. So there is this idea buried in there where it's like, let's if it's nuts, let's get nuts.
Yeah.
Let's just be fucking insane with credit.
This has been talked about a lot lately. Like, rhetorically, the way that he writes and the way that he speaks even is playing into this attitude of, it's fucked. You're not going to get yours unless you fight for it. The rules don't matter. It's time that we play by our own rules. That's essentially where he's going with it. And again, if you're just talking about practice, he's fucking absolutely correct. He's absolutely right. But and for a lot of guys, maybe that's enough. But I'm not saying to not implement this. I'm saying if I see somebody try to implement this on a white population, it's time for a little bit of violence. But if I see this implemented on a global stage, like if we took power and we're going to implement it, absolutely we should implement this in Africa. Absolutely. Let's do it.
He wants infinite credit for Africa.
I want Africans to have infinite access to loans in their own currency. I want to watch them starve through their own stupidity with infinite access to credit. Yeah.
This is true accelerationism.
Yeah.
What's the line from Nick Land? Something like, English is a language given by God to do apocalypse with.
Yes. Oh, that's beautiful.
And I feel that really runs through my neural cortex these days.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.